So thank you to Jim and Ryan and the product team, all of whom are done breathing again now that they are off stage. We were so glad that you were able to sit through this with us and hear the story and the narrative of where Florence is going. And hopefully it really resonated with you that we are trying to move from a narrative around shared pain to one of shared experience and shared responsibility through shared workflows. So with that, that formally ends the product session of the opening. And now we get to move into a little bit something more exciting. Before I transition to the next speaker, though, are there anybody from the back who would like to find a seat who is standing? We're good? All right. All right. Well, thank you guys. I am now excited to welcome to the stage somebody who I am a little bit of a fangirl of. You may have heard of him. His name is Dr. Robert Califf. Dr. Califf is one of the founding members of the Duke Clinical Research Initiative. He was also led it for many years before becoming a 2-time FDA commissioner and then eventually taking a space at Verily and leaving his mark upon technology. For those of you who do not collect FDA commissioner baseball cards the way that I do, I can't think of anybody that I am more impressed with and who has made a bigger impact on our industry. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Califf to the stage. So you get the hot seat. I did. Yes. All right, Dr. Califf.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right. It's a little wet here in Atlanta.
Yes, I'm glad you were able to make it in. Also, I have to let you know that in order to prep for this so I could read my notes, I had to increase the font on my phone for the first time. So that is my commitment to you, sir. I am now using the large font so I can read.
I've been there for a while.
Well, thank you, Dr. Califf. One of the things that I have been most impressed with you is your length and breadth of your career and your innate interest in trial operations. It is not often that I work with physicians who take such an interest in it, so it's amazing to see that you've done that. Looking back over your time and tenure, where do you think you've really seen improvement, and where do you think we still have some room to go?
Huh. Well, I mean, first of all, I'm interested in trial operations because I really started out as a coronary care unit director at the time when we figured out that blood clots caused heart attacks. For young people, that's hard to imagine. You would have even not known that, but we didn't. In 1975, I was taught as a medical student that blood clots did not cause heart attacks because no one was doing angiograms acutely.
Yeah.
And when you die, your blood clots lyse spontaneously, so autopsies didn't show the blood clots. But all of a sudden, we started doing angiograms in people with heart attacks, and the leading cause of death, for the first time, we knew what the cause was, but there was no effective treatment. So the pressure was on to do something. At the time, we would have 3 or 4 people a day who would die in the Duke coronary care unit because our treatment was basically morphine, nitrates, and prayer. That was essentially it.
Yeah.
And so we were really trying to develop treatments that worked, and it just turned out I had access to computing at the time at the university that most other people didn't have. So we became a coordinating center for clinical trials. It was immediately obvious that the best ideas in the world usually don't work, and that the only way to tell is to do a high-quality clinical study, preferably for interventions of clinical trial.
Yeah.
And getting good data turned out to be really hard, so I got really interested in it. So working on it my whole career, what I'd say in terms of victories and defeats, I hate to say this, but I would say the theory has become far advanced, and I think your presentation now showed where the theory is headed. In practice, you also pointed out it's actually taking longer.
Right.
Our protocols are more complicated, and we're sort of gummed up in terms of the speed we need to move. And this is especially important now for some reasons that I'm sure we'll go into as we talk. But I think we know a lot about what needs to be done. Unfortunately, at least in the U.S., it's not fitting in well right now with the practice of healthcare.
Yeah. And if you could point to a couple of reasons why you feel there's that pushback. I mean, I have my theories. I'd like to hear yours.
Well, I think it's sort of useful to divide clinical trials into two types. There's the type which is intended to advance um, a medical product through the system,
Right.
and there's the type that's intended to inform patients and clinicians about what to do with various interventions. It might be a medical product, it might be a system of care where the clinical outcome is the important thing. And for that latter type, we know now this it should just be part of routine clinical practice,
Mhm.
but it's not.
Right.
We've built a healthcare system in which we purposely separated research and practice, and that is a horribly inefficient way to do things. Now, on that other type, which is mostly what you were talking about in your presentation, I've got a new drug. We know that most new drugs don't work. 9 out of 10 that get into phase 1 don't make it to market.
Yep.
Um, and so we got to winnow out the winners and the losers, and a lot of that can and should happen separate from clinical practice. Phase 1 trials being the really good example. Um, but because it's sort of been a one-off industry, each pharmaceutical or device sponsor on his or her own, without the kind of collaboration that's needed, it's just been horribly inefficient. And the research sites have been the same way. We've been unable to achieve an economy of scale. I know that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
We'll see if you succeed. A lot of people have tried, and we know it's the right thing to do. So we'll see if we get there.
Yeah, it is. It's something, I mean, I've been around 20 something years. And when I started, it felt like everyone's like, this is so slow. We can't be this way forever. And then I know that a lot of us in the room, we get caught up in the day to day and we don't see the progress we've made. But it is sometimes nice to look back like decade or two, right? In the year, you're not going to see it. But if you go back 10 years and 10 years before that, you can start to see a little bit of progress. So yeah, I'm hopeful we'll make it too. It may be my child who sees it before I do.
Well, it's one of those things where, yes, we've made a lot of progress, but technology is moving so much faster than the
Right.
ability to evaluate it. It's like the goal post keeps moving,
Right.
and we have to adapt to that. And there are several big reasons why I think in the U.S. right now it's critical. We're spending $5 trillion a year in healthcare delivery for the worst survival of any high income country by far, and that difference is growing.
Right.
So I feel a compelling need not just to evaluate products to see get them on the market, but to figure out which ones are really effective and which ones we can stop wasting money on,
Right.
so we can focus the money on the ones that are really useful and effective. And then on the other hand, what a time of biomedical science. You talk about gene editing, um, tremendous changes in the development of devices. We just came from the greatest show in device industry, the TCT meeting, which was in San Francisco,
Yeah.
and just the technology is breathtaking. I mean, as a cardiologist, if you had told me when I started in the 1980s that we could replace a cardiac valve percutaneously,
Yeah.
I just that just how could you possibly do that? But
Right.
it's routine
Yeah.
now. So the technology keeps moving, and our assessment capability is not keeping pace, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, it is. It is a problem. We see it not only in the medical technology, but in technology we use here and just the innovation. And I pointed at it, it's starting to go faster. And at this point, it's outpacing our ability to keep up with the change. Having that mindset, thinking about what the next 5 years are going to look like, where do you think we're going to hit the biggest potholes in the road as we try to go faster? Because there's a lot of people thinking about how to go faster and trying to innovate, but inevitably we're going to hit that bump.
Well, I think whenever we talk about this, I think it's useful to take a step back and look at what the overall enterprise really is. Now, I think it's appropriate that your presentation that I just listened to is focused on the sponsor and the site.
Mhm.
Um, but we have many other players on the field in order to get this done. The participants or patients,
Mhm.
in most cases, are really important. The regulatory system is obviously important. The regulators at the FDA and at CMS, if we're talking about the U.S., have views, and things can't go forward without their agreement. The IRBs are by law meant to be independent of everybody else so that they can watch the ethics. So, in all that mix, it's almost like a recipe for inefficiency because it really is almost a social activity as much as it is anything else to reach agreement.
Yeah.
If you think about a multi-site clinical trial of the kind that I used to do and that I really love, you might have 1,000 sites. Everybody's got to agree on a protocol. You got to have consent forms, et cetera. So the inefficiency is always at risk of getting worse. And I would argue that despite the advances in technology, if you look at the metrics that you referred to, and Ken Gatz at Tufts, it keeps a really comprehensive set of metrics, we're actually headed the wrong direction in terms of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But it's fixable if we can pull these elements together. And I am an AI enthusiast also because it's a technology that can help us do what we've known that we needed to do for a long time.
Right.
But it was just really hard to do it with the technology that existed um, as I was coming up through the system. So I think the biggest, potholes right now are just more on the human side than the technology side.
Right.
It's how do you get people to work together to achieve common purposes?
Absolutely. That's something that we talk about all the time, that the best technology in the world is not going to help it if we can't agree to use it. And how do we do change management? So I think that's something for everybody in the room to think about is as we move forward, there are tools that are going to be available. There'll be innovation available. What is the change management process that has to be in play in order to make those successful? Because it is humans. Humans are always the failure in the system, right? So how do we help ourselves?
Well, I think there's going to be sort of a philosophical purpose issue going on. Now, I'm talking about the U.S. I think things are different in the U.S. right now than almost every other country for the reasons that I gave. And we have an unusual government right now. And so it's going to be a tumultuous time. And the lectures I'm giving, it's really about dealing with these issues in a tumultuous time because
Yep.
it's unpredictable what RFK Jr. may decide to do on the next day. You just don't know what is going to happen. And we are in this situation where, thanks in part to Maha, the average American now is aware that we have the worst health outcomes of any high income country. What we got to do is to not steer the country in a direction of let's use unproven dietary supplements and other things like that that are being sold over the internet. Let's develop the evidence for what works and do it really well. And that's where the research and practice have to come together.
Right.
So, in everything else I've done, it's really hard to make change if leadership doesn't see it as a priority.
Right.
So, I probably don't have to take a poll of how many people think that research is the top priority of the institutions
I mean, we could.
that they work for. Um, what I'm hearing, now that I'm out of the government again for the second time, is the pressure on clinicians in the U.S. has never been so extreme to generate revenue through
Mhm.
clinical practice. And I know that a more efficient research operation can generate revenue, but it's hard to compete.
It is hard to compete.
And so we've got to win the battle philosophically. The way to get out of the conundrum that we're in is not just to generate more RVUs, but to be smarter in what we do by having the evidence about what's effective and what's not
Mhm.
and how to use it. And also to move quickly for some of the dramatic new things that are coming along. I mean, if you had a rare genetic disease right now in your family, it's really, we're on the verge for hundreds of these rare genetic diseases to revolutionize treatment so that children can live who otherwise would have died. Um, but we're also in a situation where our children's hospitals are in dire straits right now. There aren't enough pediatricians. The whole system has to get organized to take care of. And I think, to me, that's while we're working from the bottom up to develop operational systems, which is what you're doing.
Mhm.
And we need consortia of sites that work together. And it does sound like you're pulling those together. We also need at the top to have a purpose, to make it a priority.
Right.
to get these things done. And that's something that I believe we all need to be involved in. We all need to be voicing that as an important element.
Absolutely. Um, before I'm trying to save the Maha conversation for a little bit later. So before we delve into that one, I want to talk about we've
Feel
talked.
free, by the way, I always like this. Let me just give my spiel here to make sure we can liven it up. I've been a political appointee twice. I've been through 2 Senate confirmations. I've had to deal with Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders in the same hearings in the Senate. I'm 74 years old. I'm not looking for a job, and I'm not looking for an NIH grant. So I can say, I, I can say words like equity and disparities and not worry that, somebody's going to cancel my contract or whatever
That's true.
is involved. And so, you know, don't worry, everything's on the table. Feel free to bring up any issue that
Yeah. Noted. In our prep sessions, Dr. Califf and I had 2 prep sessions. I was like, "Do I need to send you the script ahead of time?" He's like, "Literally, you can't scare me." And I was like, "All right, good, good. I like to know the bar is low." Um, okay. Well, in that notion, I wanted to push on a topic that is a little bit controversial in this room around the concept of site networks and the change of from the academic medical center as the hub and the gold standard of research to understanding that there's a lot of problems in AMCs and then individual sites and then the networks and this concept you talked about it has to have some economic impact. Sites have to do well in order to move forward. People talk about those networks as being for profit as negative, but in reality, like if you're not for profit, then you're not able to fund the operation. How do you talk about that and see that balanced out in your space?
Sure. I mean, a couple of things here. First of all, as I mentioned, I started out being a director of intensive care units, and you learn there very quickly that you may be high-minded about the theory of how diseases work and what the right treatments are. But if you're going to save lives, it's the operations. It's actually the nurses and respiratory therapists and who really make the difference in how a unit operates. And I think while I'm very interested in the big theories of clinical trials and methods and all that, at a fundamental level, unless you have the operations right, clinical trials aren't going to work. And each individual site is not enough for most of the questions that are most important these days. You need multi-site trials, and you can't be an efficient operator if each trial is doing its own thing. We can't have free-range chickens
Yeah.
operating as sites and expect it to work well. So you need an organization. Now, the second thing is I've learned, and I feel entitled to say this because I've worked in academic medical centers and biotech and big tech. I worked at, as you mentioned, at Google for 6 years. I've been on the boards of device companies. I've helped develop all those technologies. For profit and not for profit, when we use those words, it brings up ideas about what the purpose is.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go to a board meeting of a not-for-profit these days, it looks just like the board meeting of a for-profit
Right.
company. It's just that the margins go to different places. And so I think the real question is, what is the organization achieving and for what
Right.
purpose? The decision about whether you pay taxes, which is really what for-profit or not-for-profit means, is really a question about what's going to serve the purpose the best. It's kind of interesting. I'm helping some students start some startups now,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a third type called a public benefits corporation,
Yeah.
which is for profit, but it explicitly um, denotes that the money is meant for a purpose, and that is watched pretty carefully by the investors who don't expect to get the returns that a for-profit gets. So I think rather than sort of dividing the for-profit and not-for-profit, I would look at the purpose of the organization. Now, for-profit taken to the extreme, I think, is a problem, and it's actually the core problem in American medicine. So I'm not arguing that we should pay no attention
Right.
to what's being done with the money. Um, if you look at, what I think the core issue in American medicine right now is It's that if we were balancing financial objectives with professional or well-being of patient objectives, financial objectives are way up here now. The professional objectives are way down here.
Yeah.
And I just think we need to bring those into balance, regardless of whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit. So to summarize, what I'd say is we need site networks. I've always believed that. Probably different kinds of trials need to have different kinds of networks. Like if you're doing phase 1 trials and that's all you do, that's a very different ballgame than doing clinical effectiveness trials on a large scale where the research is actually done in the context of clinical care. And there's some commonalities, but I think banding together to get the operations right so that you can move quickly when you have the right kind of trial is really critical.
Excellent. Yeah, I think most people in this room would agree, right? It's not the institution, it's the mission and the quality of the work that they provide, as long as we're all working towards the greater good and that balance. Um, Speaking about quality, I know you talk a lot about quality by design, and I've worked with City. I've been fortunate to work with City for 3 years now, trying to help with some of the quality by design initiatives, and really talking about what it means to be thoughtful and planful on the front end, so that our protocols are better delivered on the back end. Do you want to talk a little bit about the work that you've done in this space and kind of your viewpoint?
Sure. I mean, I really started out that way because, as I mentioned, I started with heart attack.
Hmm.
You can't take a heart attack patient and say, we've got a clinical trial. Why don't you come to our research clinic, down the road?
Yes.
You have to get consent and do the trial in the context of delivering, very risky clinical care. And we learned very quickly that to distinguish effective from ineffective heart attack treatments, you need large sample sizes. So I went from running a coronary care unit to doing 40,000 patient clinical trials in the course
Right.
of a few years. And it became obvious that if you try to use the same methods for a phase 1 trial and for a 40,000 person outcome trial, you're not going to do any 40,000 people trials because you just can't
Right.
afford it. And I think we figured that out 30 or 40 years ago, but for whatever reason, the industry sort of got off on its own approach of taking the most detailed approach to early phase trials and then trying to apply that to big trials. And that led now to a lot of discussions with methodologists and regulators and government agencies about what's a better approach. And, it's just something that's used in every industry, quality by design. You start with what's the question?
What do you
What are
mean?
you trying to answer?
Yeah.
And if the question is, does treatment A or treatment B reduce mortality, and you need 20,000 people in the trial, you probably don't need to collect how many times people have hiccups for the 2-year period of the trial duration. And if the question is which antibiotic is better, and that this is one that really bothered me my first time through the FDA, you probably don't need to collect every medication change in an ICU. We looked when I was at FDA in 2016, for example, and no one was doing ID development
Right.
essentially because the cost was so high. 94% of the data that was collected was never even looked at by the FDA reviewers. So what we need to do is start with what's the question, then work back to what data do you need to collect, and then what are the elements of the data where you really need very high quality. What are the elements of the data where you can tolerate error rates that are within a certain range?
Yeah.
Because they're not really critical. They're providing background information that would be nice to know, but not essential to answer the question. Then you can design a trial where the budget matches the need, and you're not wasting money on things that are never going to be used.
Right.
And that's sort of the spirit of quality by design. On the other hand, if you're doing a phase 1 trial of a new molecule, you need clocks and you need to give the treatment at exactly when you think, and you need to make the measurements very precisely. So another way of saying it is there is no substitute for being an expert in the field.
Right.
And somebody very smart, I think all of you know that before thalidomide, there was no requirement for proving efficacy of a drug to get it on the market. If a doctor said it was good, it was presumed to be good.
Yeah.
But doctors were also selling different kinds of cigarettes. Is one better than other. But in the law, it says adequate and well-controlled clinical studies in the view of experts in the field.
Right.
And what we've done, I think, was to say we can make one size fits all rather than saying let's use expertise to design a trial that really optimally answers the question
Right.
in the most efficient way. So that's what quality by design is meant to do. Now, there is one other thing that relates to AI. Some of the things that we were talking about 5 or 6 years ago, we don't have to worry about as much now, as we're moving into an era where we'll be able to crawl electronic health records to just collect all the data for
Right.
various things. What used to cost a fortune to do by translation from one record to another, almost by hand, the way you think about,
Yeah.
even though it's in electronic systems, didn't automatically transfer. That's happening now. It's not where it needs to be yet, but it won't be too much longer before it is. So a lot of the stuff we used to worry about, maybe we won't have to worry about so much in the future.
Yeah, the medical record thing, I grew up in the military, and so every time we changed post, I remember my dad having to go get our medical records, and we would literally carry them to the next location where we were gonna be stationed, and we would turn them in, and that's how we had continuity of care, and that seems silly, right? But at least the military thought about it. Post outside of that world, there is my care records are in 15 different centers, right, as I've moved throughout the industry. How do we get that together so we can see the true longitudinal data around my evolution? And I think that's exciting. I think that is exciting about technology. You hinted at something that I think is exciting, but I also guess probably made a couple in this room shiver about AI can crawl medical records, right? And start to aggregate data and do all of that. How many people got a little nervous when they heard that? It's okay, it's a safe space. Y'all are liars. I've been in rooms with you, y'all are liars. Whenever we talk about AI and overlaying on patient data, there's almost an immediate visceral reaction to it. But we know that's where we need to go. So, like, as we start to think about that, how can we do that in a way that is conscientious so that we're allaying the fears, but really addressing what needs to happen, which is getting better data and better and faster access for analysis?
I think there's several things about AI and electronic health records. And, even if we didn't say AI, we just said people looking at your electronic health record. But of course, the beauty of AI is that it can do things in seconds that a human would take days or
First.
weeks
Yeah.
or to do sometimes. I think the first thing to realize in the big picture, and this is no secret, but for reasons that I actually disagree with, we made a division in the way we thought about the ethics of people's data between health data and other data. And you probably all know that if I wanted to predict, until you actually get a serious illness, if I wanted to predict when you're going to die or when you're going to get sick, I would do much better using your consumer data than your health data. I worked at Google, and there's no prohibition on, I mean, Google and the other big tech companies know everything about you. They know where you shop, they know what you buy. Um, and, those kinds of things really tell you more about a person's health when they're not overtly sick than an electronic health record
Right.
does. Um, and so I think that's wrong that we ought to be treating all data the same for the reason that I just gave, but we've made that division. Um, s- and then I would say the argument we really need to have is one example is de-identified data and identified data. Identified data is much more, if I wanted to help you as a doctor, I would do much better with identified data than de-identified data. That's kind of obvious.
Right.
But the same is true if you wanted to learn about which treatments are best or just about anything else about health. And I hate to tell you this, but there really is no such thing as de-identified data. And this has been known for a long time, but a good computer scientist can take so-called de-identified data by the 18 criteria that we talk about and using probabilistic inference can pretty much figure out who you are if they wanted to do it. So the question really is not, in my view, should we prohibit it, but what should the penalty be for using it inappropriately? And the argument ought to be about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate.
Right.
Um, So another way of thinking about this, if you're mathematical, my whole career has been about algorithms of predicting, you know, heart attack outcomes or heart failure outcomes. And you got a set of variables and then it equals something. AI is just a much more complicated set of variables that's infinitely expansive to produce some outcome in the equation. And the question is, what's the outcome of interest? If the outcome of interest is a humanistic thing that helps people, then we need more of it, not less.
Right.
If the outcome is something that's being used to segregate people in a way that is not good from a humanistic perspective, this is like a nuclear weapon that just makes it easier and to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And one concern I have right now is that the biggest use of AI in healthcare is to segregate people who can pay from those who can't. Probably if you're a clinician, you probably know that your administrators have a long list of which RVUs and which procedures make the biggest profit.
Right.
And you're told to do more of those.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when we use the word payer mix, what it really is saying, the people who on whom we can make money and the people on whom we can't make money. And AI is really good at that. If we gain control of that dependent variable, what is the equation trying to solve for? Then I think the more AI, the better.
Yeah.
Because we'll just do things much more efficiently.
Right.
But we're not there yet.
We're not. We're not. We're warming up to it. It's a crawl, walk, run, as we say in technology. Getting people used to the idea and then starting to show that it is assume the good, right? Assume that we're acting in a good manner and in a safe manner and go from there.
Well, if I had one message in this, it's don't assume that and speak up.
Yeah.
This is a time where I think a lot of people need to have courage to speak up, to just balance. You said it, no margin, no mission. We all understand that. If you're running a site, believe me, I ran site networks. The minute you go a few months without a clinical trial, you go under because the operating expenses, you're paying people.
Yeah.
And, they should get paid, but if there's no revenue, you're out of business. We all understand that. We got to balance that with the purpose of all that. And that's going to take people speaking up because I'm using one of my favorite slides now is a meme. You may remember the meme that was popular about a decade ago. Math is hard. Let's go shopping. And I think right now it's clinical outcomes are hard. Let's make money.
Yeah.
It's just much harder to figure out how to balance things so that you're really doing things that accrue the benefit of the patient.
Fair. One of the things
You're
that
free to argue, by the way.
No, I think it's fair. Like sometimes it's easy for me to be opportunistic and be like, well, we would never do that. Why would anybody else do that? But it is like we do have to be vocal. We do need to push forward. We need to talk when boundaries are crossed in a way that is not progress but backwards. So I appreciate that viewpoint. You hinted though at a couple of things, and you and I talked about a little on our prep call, is that the whole barrier to adoption of some of these innovations, quality by design, RBQM, AI, things like that, is the perception of risk or the worry of penalty. And you said something that I thought was really interesting. You're like everybody's afraid of a 483. Who in here is afraid of a 483? Safe space, people, hands up. All right. It's literally the boogeyman. When I was at a research site, anytime a physician was giving me attitude, I'd be like, "You're a 483 waiting to happen." Right? It happens. But you were like, 483 isn't meant to be punitive. And I think that's a really interesting concept, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, who would have thought an FDA commissioner would be passionate about 483s? But I've gotten 483s, so
Yeah.
I know a good bit about it, and I can't say that I solved the problem at the FDA, but we sure looked at it in detail and worked on it. What a 483 is meant to be is someone noting that there's an issue that needs to be resolved with the quality of the work that's being done. Sometimes it really can be a disaster, like we had, generic drug manufacturing sites with animals running through the facility, and that's like a real bad 483.
Yeah.
But not signing your form correctly
Not
on a
finishing
clinical
every
trial
page.
is that's just something that can be dealt with, and I think it just has gotten out of control where if you get a 483, you're worried that you will not be offered the chance to participate in the clinical trials, and then it turns into an escalating inspection war of maybe not even trying to mislead investigators when they come to look at other
Yeah.
things, and then a huge cost of it's like the cost of the last 10% of stuff that's done in clinical trials is enormous, and yet most of it contributes nothing to answering the trial. It's just buttoning things up so you don't get a 483.
Right.
Now, when you looked inside the FDA, things are changing rapidly there. So I'm just talking about up until January.
Up until the last commissioner
What
left.
what what was going on inside the FDA was there was a system where the inspectorate was separate from the product centers, and so you had inspectors going out finding problems, writing their reports. There might be a 483. Then the whole thing was lateraled over a wall to the product center, let's say drugs, biologics, or devices. Then they would put it in perspective and make a decision about what the final outcome was.
Right.
But in the meanwhile, months would go by. And of course, if you got a 483, you were in purgatory and
Yeah.
may lose business during that time. So what we did was to pull that quality system into one system as opposed to separate systems. I've heard that, I think probably due to personnel shortages, they're stopping that now because they need the inspectors to go
Right.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, but we've got to overcome this because hiding that you have a problem is a really bad idea.
Right.
And punishing people who find problems and correct them is a really bad idea. I learned a lot about this early on in cardiac surgery. Before we had percutaneous intervention, we managed the first registry for cardiac surgery. The issue that came up was it was so expensive in the 1980s compared to other things that most states said, we're not going to pay you unless you collect data to show that you're doing a good job.
Right.
And the surgeons wisely said, rather than have the states collect the data, we'll do it ourselves. And they hired us to do it. And we found this paradox. It was really puzzling. The surgical sites that had the most complications also had the lowest mortality. And of course, now what we learned was the reason was because they were actually looking for complications.
Right.
They were measuring them and then they were fixing the problem.
Right.
So their patients did better. But if all you were looking at was the complications, you would punish those sites as being inferior. The ones with fewer complications basically weren't looking as hard
Right.
to record and measure them. So the 483, I think, has gotten perverted into something which is on net sort of detrimental.
Right.
But I'm not saying we should do away with measuring and reporting these things. We need to really work on
How they're
fixing it.
right.
But it's so ingrained in the way the different organizations work that it's hard to fix.
It is. I was at a talk recently that talked about psychological safety and talks about the hospitals that report the most errors are actually the ones who have the best outcomes, right? Because they're not afraid. And so I think that I wanted you to tell that story because I think it's important for us to remember in here that issues happen, right? 483s may happen. You will have findings, you will have kappas, but not to the anxiety shouldn't come with that because each one of those is an opportunity to get better. And as we make it more okay to report those and acknowledge them, you get to psychological safety and hopefully we get to better outcomes.
Yeah, this is a chance for me to shamelessly promote my Substack.
Go for it.
Rather than write a book, which a lot of people urge me to do after being in government twice, I'm just writing on a thing called a Substack, which is a chapter. It's about one a week. They're going to be about 100 of them. It's going to be sort of like a book, but I've got 2 or 3 chapters that will be devoted to the 483, and I do plan to follow up on this because I think the analogy of, you said hospitals in general, or my early experience with cardiac surgery, I think it's really detrimental if finding problems and improving yourself is regarded as a negative
Right.
thing, and we've got to fix this.
We do. Also, I have to thank Dr. Califf for his Substack as well, because that forced me to learn a whole nother platform in technology that I was not prepared to do. So you are still innovating on the daily. Um, okay, so we talked about 4E3. Now I want to dive into the part of the conversation around you talk about priorities and funding and amplification in government really helps set those priorities. We know that we're in a position now where funding decisions have shifted and there's a lot of fallout from that. I think I've heard noise about the federal funding going down will be made up by this influx of industry funding, and I've also seen a lot of conversations about how that's not actually plausible because there's different reasons and purposes for those dollars. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the funding shakeup and how you see that playing out and what might be some of the positive or negative outcomes of that.
Well, anyone who knows how this is gonna play out, please let me know, because I I think it's so unpredictable where we're gonna end up. Even the NIH budget, which the administration wanted to cut, this is one of the few places where senators showed spine. I thought to be a senator, you had to be born without a spine, but they actually stood up on this. But there's gonna be a showdown whenever they ever come back to work.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when that's gonna be either. There's gonna be a showdown over the NIH budget. Um, just to sort of start at the beginning, how does funding work? I've talked about the different kinds of clinical trials, and I've worked on all sides. And, there's a reason why the medical products industry, drug device, biologics manufacturers, decide what trials to do using a net present value calculation. They're trying to get over a threshold to get a product on the market with a certain label, and that is their purpose, and that's what drives them, and that's what drives the questions that they ask. It's also critical to know that to get FDA approval, all you have to do is show that benefits outweigh risks for one indication, for one population, for some period of time. Everything else you'd want to know about that product to actually use it in practice doesn't have to be answered to get on the market. Like, which is better? How do you combine products? Even the right dose. I've been involved in developing drugs where we were pretty sure we didn't have the best dose, but we had a dose that worked, and that's enough if you do it. And so there are a whole set of questions that right now in our system usually don't ever get answered.
Right.
And it leads to all this uncertainty in clinical practice and the variation and enormous expense and bad outcomes that we have. And so in my view, I'm a big fan of the medical products industry driven research. We need to do it. And remember, just to get that one product where the one situation where the benefits outweigh the risk for some population for some period of time, 9 out of 10 drugs that get into phase one don't make it.
Right.
So we're dealing with a very difficult. If you wanted to be a betting person, you would always bet against
The drugs.
success in drug and device development. I used to think devices were easier, and then I worked at Google, and I swear, my job was I had a shingle on my door that said, "If you think you have a great software product for health, see me." And there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't have some brilliant software engineer with a great idea, but almost none of them made it all the way through the system into clinical use. And so it's hard. So I'm a big fan of that. Let's keep doing it and do it more efficiently. But we need another system that answers the question for clinicians and patients, what do I do with all this stuff
Right.
to get the best outcomes? And this is where I think we're in peril right now if we don't put emphasis on that part of the system.
Right. Thank you. Um, so keeping along the lines of peril, one of the other themes that have come out lately is around the conversation around science and medical approval and using evidence to support decision making. You've hinted at RFK Jr. and some of the challenges that presents. I know in the conversations I've had both at Citi and then I work with ACRO to go to the Hill and talk to senators, is there's this concern about trust in the system, trust in the data. And it takes a lot of time for us to build trust. We've been working on it for decades to build trust in patient populations and in diverse populations. And now there's a concern that some of that trust might be being undone and being undone in a way that is irrecoverable. How do you feel about that? And what do you see the conversations where you sit happening? Is there as much concern across the board, or do you think it's valid?
Um, yeah, this could be a long conversation, so we might want to divide it up into parts, and you can decide what you want to delve
Okay.
into. I don't think there's any argument that as a society, people have lost trust in institutions, and we've talked about that a lot with regard to federal agencies. That's obvious. But what's talked about less is that they're also losing trust in the medical establishment. Pharma has been in the doghouse for years. Early in my career, I'll never forget, there was a time when the pharma CEO roundtable was opposed to clinicaltrials.gov because they were arguing that acknowledging the human experiments that they were doing would destroy their business model. And so they brought me up to meet with them. And the fellow in front of me had just finished consulting with the oil industry and the tobacco industry.
Yeah.
And I kept his slides because I thought they were phenomenal. It basically said, if you want people to trust you, you have to act trustworthy.
Right.
Like, who on earth could say that it's ethical to be doing experiments on human beings and keeping it a secret, which is what was happening. Well, that all got fixed. Clinicaltrials.gov is thriving, and the business model was not destroyed. But there has been a very direct effort of many people to undermine confidence of the public in our institutions. Some of it merited for the reason that I gave. If you're not acting trustworthy, my favorite one right now is health system leaders who say we're patient centered.
Hmm.
Have you ever tried to get an appointment in the United States now for anything? I mean, it's just impossible, I think, to make that argument. It flies in the face of what people are experiencing, including the clinicians that work in the health systems.
Right.
So we, in part, brought this on ourselves, but there's also an active effort through social media, particularly, to undermine it. And many of the people who are most aggressively undermining it are selling something else, mostly unregulated products that you can buy over the internet, and they're making a lot of money doing it. So this is a tough problem. What people still have confidence in more than anything else are the individual human beings that they're seeing when they actually get an appointment, whether it's in a research clinic or a medical clinic. Nurses are higher than doctors. Doctors are pretty high, though.
Yeah.
Pharmacists are very much trusted. It's the people they interact with, and you know right away that these people are really dedicated to trying to help me in the best way possible. So we've got to bridge that. And if you do, you want me to talk a little bit about social media?
I would love to hear your opinion on social media.
I mean, there were several reasons I went to Google. First of all, the first time Trump came in, I was out of a job, so I needed something to do. But I've always been a Duke person, and the university actually said, "Fine, why don't you split your work between coming back to Duke and going out to Google?" So I lived coast to coast. One of the big reasons was I'd become convinced that addiction to social media was a major problem, and I had a hope. And of course, that's built on the idea that when you are scrolling or doom scrolling, um, you're experiencing surges of dopamine and other neurohormones in your brain that are telling you to keep doing it. And I thought we could reverse engineer that. And what I learned in 6 years there was you can't reverse engineer it. It turns out that there's no way to really stop it just by using social media itself. And so I think the only solution to this is volume. I also spent time, I mean, what an amazing advertising machine. You can love it or hate it. There were plenty of reasons to hate it. But it is amazing. And there are some secrets to advertising to cause you to use your hypothalamus and limbic system in preference to your cerebral cortex when you shop. But most of it is just volume. If you say the same thing over and over, people start to believe it.
Yep.
And
And
what's
repeat control.
happening is the purveyors of misinformation are constantly on social media, 24/7. The medical establishment puts out a press release or tells you to come to the clinic in 3 months for a 15-minute visit. And there's no competition between those two. And so I think the biggest change we got to make is that our people who are who really believe that the best way to improve people's health is to have them do things repetitively that are proven to be effective, like eat the right food, don't use tobacco, exercise, use effective generic drugs for our common problems. They're almost all generic now, except for one big one, obesity, which will change over time.
Yeah.
But what people are hearing is astounding. I got a message from one of our advanced research fellows last month, which I put um, on a subset,
Yeah.
which is there, and she got pregnant and very knowledgeable person, and she said, "Where did I get the best information about what to do at the end of pregnancy and with my new baby?" It was TikTok, and she went through how much easier it was to learn from TikTok than waiting weeks to see
The
a
position.
great OBGYN, but for 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then she gave me a list of 10 things that were just as compelling on TikTok that were lethal or not good.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be no way for a layperson to distinguish what was useful, reliable information from information that could really kill you.
Yeah.
And so we can't ignore this, is what I believe, and we're going to have to wake up to it. Now, how to do that? That's
The different one.
that's a tough question,
Right.
but I think a lot of it is volume, and I worry a lot that our sleepiness on this is part of the reason that Americans are doing so many things that are unhealthful right now.
Right. As a parent of a teenager, I can tell you that the repetitive motion really does influence behavior buying and questions that you have to answer for them. So it's out there. All right, Dr. Califf, thank you. We're closing in on our time, but I don't want to leave the room on a sad note that we all have to give up TikTok. All of you. Speaking to who the audience is, we have sites, we have CROs, we have sponsors. What can they do in their day-to-day as they move forward out of this conference to really kind of stay engaged and keep moving forward in a way that is productive and helpful to advancing the mission of better care in America?
Well, when I'm giving this talk to clinicians, I always make the point that your number one job is to practice your profession optimally as best you can. And that just means be expert in what you do. So if you're a research site, kind of things that you all were talking about in the introduction, I'm not here to endorse a product, and I don't know about know the details about Florence, but these conceptually simple operational things are so important because we have so many more questions that need to be answered than we have answers. And getting the right evidence is going to be critical to guiding society on what we need to spend money on in healthcare. So focus on being an optimal research site. That's job number one. But number two is preserve some mental energy to speak up on this big issue in front of us now of how do we balance finance with professionalism. And when I say professionalism, if you're in the healthcare industry, that really means your fiduciary interest is to the patient, not to the entity that you work for. And that requires that you speak up because it's so much easier just to focus on the money and assume that someone else is worrying about what's good for the patient. And I would really emphasize having the courage to speak up. And it's not like we're just going to do things for free. We still have to be financially okay, but let's balance it with what's good for the patient.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Califf. I appreciate this time and this talk. And I appreciate your fashion sense and commitment to bow ties. So, in a spirit of non-branded, non-endorsement, we did get you a new bow tie custom made in Florence colors, but it doesn't say Florence, and hopefully you will enjoy it and add it to your collection.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Excellent job. I'll see you.